Right, so we've got the body and all the other good stuff and the propeller. Notice that the propeller group is just grouped alone. It is no longer part of any sort of symmetry or cloner system because it's just, oopsie daisy, it's just kind of hanging out on its own because there are some things we want to do to it when it comes time to smoothing and making the rest of our drone look pretty and more detailed. So let's start by opening up our reference. And we're going to tackle the outer parts of the body for now, because that's going to be our kind of most important thing probably to tackle. So that is our drone body 1 right here. So this is just rename that, clean that up. And again, the propeller motors, these are separated objects because they're going to get a different material, as we can see. They are sort of, not sure if it's metal or if it's just metal colored plastic, but it's obviously separate from the main white body. So let's just start here, and for the time being I'm going to ungroup the propeller motor, and then we're just going to solo just the body and just focus on this. So the biggest thing to getting this to start looking nice and smooth, like our reference photos, is going to be putting it in a subdivision surface. And again, when we make this, we want to be holding down Alt on our keyboard. And we can see that that grouped together the subdivision surface and the drone body. And if I switch back to my A key, N A, N B, which is the same as switching the display modes here, we can see that this is starting to get smoothed out. It's not exactly the right shape. We can see sort of along the top, this is sort of a little bit more like a kind of a bubble or a hump. So we can do a little bit of tweaking now to sort of replicate that, I think, because if we look at it from the side, we can see the top of our drone is just sort of flat, which is a little boring. So what I want to do, and an important hotkey when you're going to be working in this stage is Q. Q will turn on or off a parent object. In this case, it's going to be turning on and off the subdivision surface. So we can see just tapping Q on and off helps us go from smooth to normal mode. So if I grab that point on the top there and jump back to my top camera, I can pull this up until it starts to create a little bit more of an arch, which is going to be a little bit more accurate to our reference photo. Now don't worry too much if you get a little bit of sort of weirdness going on. When you're at this stage, you're going to be encountering, some stuff that we haven't encountered yet before. You might get some weird areas along your mesh that, let's see if I can try to replicate something. If you see how, as I'm moving this up and down, we can see certain parts of this are starting to turn like a lightish white color. Or if we view it kind of from another side, it's going to turn sort of like black or whatever. Those sorts of those things in the viewport aren't really that bad. Like, it's not like a good or a bad thing. It's just going to happen. So try not to worry too much. Now, obviously, if you had accidentally moved something and stuff was starting to turn like inside out, like this, obviously that's bad because the drone's not supposed to be shaped like that. But if in the course of you modeling your drone, and obviously everyone's are going to be a little bit differently made than mine, if you're if you're looking at yours and you see this sort of white a little bit of shading alongside, certain portions or whatever, don't freak out. Feel free to ask me if you are a little worried or nervous or whatever. But chances are it's not going to be that big of a deal. So what I'm going to now do is select just along the middle parts of my arms. And I'm going to raise these up a little bit. And you're going to see that shading change happen that I just was kind of talking about. And I missed a point right there. So I want to make sure that I grab everything that I want to. I raised it up a little bit too far. And so what this is going to do, if we see if it's going to be visible for us or not. If I can try to position my camera so that it's a little bit easier for me to explain what I did. I just raised those up a little bit, and it's going to make this a little bit more of a round shape. This is a little bit more oval-like than square-like, these arms. And so I'm actually going to raise those up a little bit more, I think. But I'm going to deselect the points on the end, because we can see right now this is starting to sort of raise up a little bit more than I would like. I don't want to push that too far. Alright, so I'm going to do sort of pretty much the same thing along the bottoms now. Just go through this real quick. Basically do the same process, but kind of in reverse.
Did you get the inner point on all the other ones? Yeah.
Yes. You missed a point.
Yes, I did. Thank you,
on that
Eagle.
Other one too.
Yeah.
Those ones. Yeah, I think I will want those. So make sure I have all the points that I want grabbed. Okay. So the ones on the top are, that's just a selection point. So I'm not going to worry about that. It's hard to tell, but it's shaped differently. And it's only visible when you're looking through the object, which is not typical behavior. So then, same thing, just deselect just the very tip. This is just helping to sort of round out these arms a little bit more. And if you are a super student, you can go ahead and do the same thing but along the side portions here. That's going to be a little bit more time consuming than I've got sort of a time budget for here in this lecture, so I'm going to opt to skip that step. But if you want to be a little bit more accurate and you're making this model drone, then feel free to not skip that step.
If you did that, would you grab that center point too, like maybe go all the way?
You could do a loop select and select this, and then finagle with the scale tool. But if you do go down that route, you'll notice that it's going to be a little bit more. It's not just going to be this as easy as just doing this. And if you do it, you'll see why.
Okay.
So venture down that path at your own risk. So what's next? I'm going to be skipping past the vents and whatever other lines or sort of etching, and certainly the fact that the word Phantom and the brand name is engraved in this. That is a whole nother can of worms. So I think the last thing I want to do on the body is sort out the bottom, which might not be as much work as I'm expecting, because we have very nice quad-shaped polygons, all four-sided shapes here. The reason the subdivision surface is working very well is because if I just change that to 1, we'll see. So let's look at basically just as like a little description of what the subdivision surface is really doing, because it's not just like magic, air quotes. If we look at this one face right here, right? So this has got 4 points, 4 corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it has no lines going through it, right? As we can see, there's, if I were to use my knife tool, there's no horizontal or vertical line going through this. But if I turn on my subdivision surface, we'll see that there's now a line right there and a line right here. And with them both selected, we can sort of see the ghost of the polygon that we had selected. So this is where our face was. What the subdivision surface is doing is it's basically running an extra knife cut through each polygon in each direction. So it's running one up and down and one left and right, so to speak. And we can see that as we edit these values right here, the subdivision editor value, we'll see that it's going to create more and more lines. So just as kind of a basic description of what's going on, generally speaking, more lines will create more detail on an object, and more detail creates more accurate and or more rounded shapes. So it's not just it's not just magic. And these were this Catmull Clark. Catmull is like some dude who is super influential in early 3D modeling. I believe he works for Disney, or worked for Disney or Pixar or something along those lines. Basically any of these like weird words, like when we were working with the metal material and we had that word Fresnel, they're all just like older science people who are super smart and they write scientific papers. But we can use the subdivision surface to our advantage here, because this is already smoothing out what we wanted it to smooth out. If we look at the underside, or which picture was it? This front one, we can see that this nice rounded edge, sort of right along here, is already being replicated. That's already being made for us, this nice smooth corner here, because we've already done the hard work. Now we just want to make sure that we get this little back area to be a little bit less blobby, because we can see here the way that this is rounding is a little bit different. So we're actually just going to add a bevel to sort of this point right around along here. So we want to select our drone body, go to edge mode, turn off. Sometimes it's easier to turn off the subdivision surface while you're trying to grab these points. So we're just going to grab those, and we'll use our bevel tool and just give this a little bevel. Give it a subdivision or two, and we'll see that now that's a little bit harder of an edge. If we look at sort of this ghosted orange line, this is a little bit less round and less blobby in comparison to this side, which is pretty good. So I think that'll do it for the body. The next thing that would probably be worth our time is moving on to the little motor section. So let's unsolo and find that group, or that object, and then solo that as well. So with this propeller motor selected, now I will make a subdivision surface, again holding down Alt, and we'll just zoom in on this one. So with line mode off, we can see that from the top it's looking pretty round, looking pretty good, but it's getting a little weird sort of right along here, whereas this is a little bit more sort of angled and a little bit harder edged. Ours is getting a little mushy, so we can add some bevels or possibly knife cuts, and I think I'm going to opt for a knife cut first. That's what my gut is telling me. And so because we connected this all around, sort of like all around this direction, this is the direction I'm referencing, sort of this way, we can use our knife tool, and if we do the 50% little thing where we tap shift, enter in 50%, we can then make a cut right there. So we made a nice clean cut right along the middle point, and if we turn back on our subdivision surface, we'll see that that sort of makes this look a little bit less mushy. If I undo and redo that command, pay attention sort of right along this curve, sort of in the top right. We can see that that's now a little bit harder edged, a little bit nicer. And the bottom here is getting a little mushy, so we're going to do a bevel. So we'll select this bottom edge, bevel, just do just a real small one. I probably don't need multiple subdivisions there. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. So that sort of flattened out the bottom there, which is what I want. And then the last thing is, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see this detail or not, but the inside of this is almost like bowl shaped. If you did the cereal scene for the last project, this might be a little familiar looking. So we're going to add a bevel along the inside, sort of the bottom area where the little coils go. So we'll just bevel in here. Just again a small one. A little bit goes a long way. And so we'll see that that's going from a mushy bowl to a nice, more defined interior.
What about that inside underneath those arms at the top? Is there
Right
a way
here?
to make that? Well, the
Yeah.
arm goes like this, but it's kind of like doing this instead of being a right angle.
Yeah.
How would you fix that?
So
Would you bother?
what we just were referencing was the area right here. If we look at in the subdivision surface now, this is starting to not look like a right angle anymore. So what we can do there is we'll want to make a cut, but we are going to have to make it on each all four of these, which is sort of a drag, but not really, because instead of just doing 4 individual loop cuts, like I could do one there, oops, do one there, one there, one there, one there. Like, okay, that'll get the job done, but it won't be as precise.
Same, yeah.
So you can do a plane cut, and you'll want to change the plane until it lines up the way that you want it to, and I never get it on the first try.
Ah, cool.
So this will insert a cut on each of those automatically, and we can see that that is now becoming less mushy. So So that, I think, will do the job for the propeller motor group. But you'll probably notice that we did all this to one of these four, and so now these other ones over here are like we never did anything to them. So that's a little bit of a drag. So what I'm going to do actually is select like one of these pieces and then hit U, W, which is select connected. So that selected all of this one right here. And then I'm going to split this one, which is U, P, and it made another, right? So this one made a copy of just that one, right? Here's the copy. So that's this is the copy right here, the second one. And eventually I'm going to have to reset up like a cloner or some sort of thing, which I'll get to in a little while. So I'm just going to pull it out of the group and put it into the propeller group just for the time being. I'll deal with it later, I believe. So I'm going to call that one good, I think. And then what will come next? Probably the camera area. So let's jump in there. Looks like this is where our camera is. So we can see right here, ignore everything down here, ignore all of these. So just pay attention to the mounting plate upper and lower. So as I'm turning on the subdivision surface with Q, we can see that it's only affecting just this top piece, which is called mounting plate upper in my case. And that is because the subdivision surface can only see the first object within it, which is just sort of like a weird kind of limitation. So the way to solve that is to either group everything into one hierarchy, and so in this case we could just drag all of the mounting plate lower, which contains a bunch of other stuff. We could drag that to be a child of that. So now we can see that it's all in one hierarchy. So we could do that. Or we could group this. We just made a group Alt-G. We'll just call this camera group. And then we can put everything into the camera group. And so pretty much the same effect visually. The advantage to that being is that now, because things are in different groups, we're going to have a little bit more control over when it comes time to making our materials, which may or may not happen today. We'll see. So this would be how I would prefer that you would do it. So these are starting to look a little weird, not exactly shaped the way that I want them to, per the reference photos. It looks like in particular this lower mounting plate is really turning blob shaped. It's getting kind of ugly. So I'm going to turn my line mode back on, and we're just going to solo this hierarchy, which allows us to just see just this group. The camera plate lower selected. I think I'm going to try to insert I think I'm going to want to go with bevels, and this will actually be a little bit easier if I solo just this individual piece, because I'm going to need to select some specific parts. So I want to select this edge and this edge, and anything else. I think that'll do the trick. Oh, probably this one there, and this one there, and this there. These ones. Alright, so I think I'm ready to bevel. And now would be a good idea maybe just to save a new file, just in case I royally screw something up. I've been pretty confident about everything I've done up to this point. So let's try our bevel tool. Alright, so that looks like it did a pretty good job. I am sort of noticing this sort of stretching kind of going on right along here in this area, which I'm not a fan of. So I'm going to back that up and add some more lines to my selection, which are going to be these corner bits right here. And then we're going to try that again. So that's looking a little bit better. These corners are not looking like webbed feet or something weird anymore. But what we notice is that this made some weird kind of geometry. Now we're going to go back to grade school real quick, and we're going to count how many corners this shape has. So if anyone would like to shout out the answer they think. 6, yes. So this has 6 points, as we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is not really that good of a thing. That creates complications. This is sort of sloping in a weird way, which is not the way that it necessarily should be. So we've got a little bit of extra work to do now as a result of that bevel, which is fine, but no one said this stuff was easy. So we want to grab our polygon pen tool, and we're just going to add some simple extra cuts from this point to that point. Or should I do... So this just made 2 triangles. But let's see if that fixes the issue. This might be one of those situations where I've been telling you a rule this whole time, but I've actually been lying to you, in that sometimes you can use triangles, 3-sided points, or 3-sided faces. Sometimes they are necessary evils. So we see that as I undo the points that I just inserted, see how sort of weird and sort of slopey, blobby this is looking? If I redo those cuts, we can see that this is starting to look more rigid and more defined. So the reason this is working, and it's not freaking out and making us sad, is because this shape here is completely flat. And what I mean by flat is that it's not raised up in a way in relation to the points around it. Whereas if we look at this point, and this point, we can see that on our y size parameter down right here, it says 0, which is saying that there's no like sort of slope here. These points are all together, whereas if we select this point, and this point, there's a small amount of scale. So we just want to 0 that out. Alright. And so it's going to be a little bit harder to visualize that same concept. But if I were to draw an imaginary line, just temporarily, from here to here, these 3 faces now are all flat together, but at an angle, sort of. They're all coming out of this face, sort of together on the same in the same shape. So I know that's sort of a long-winded explanation, but that is the explanation for how sometimes you can use triangles, but for the most part you shouldn't. But like I said, they're a necessary evil sometimes. So I'm just going to proceed forward and make these little cuts. The important part of this sort of scenario is this face right here, this polygon, because sort of the shape over here and the shape over here are changing, like we're creating a slope, sort of like a curve. This point being a four-sided shape is what's really the important bit. So as long as you wind up with a four-sided shape right there, chances are you'll be fine. Alright, so I think those are all made there, and that's all cool. But we're getting this sort of like dome, like bubble like thing in the middle, which if we look right here is more sort of squared shaped. So I'm going to want to actually add a bevel along the top there. To make that harder edged. So I think we're going to be good down there. And if we unsolo, we'll see what we have left to do. So now I think the last little bit is going to be the lens sort of situation here with the camera. We see there's a little bit of wonkiness where our lens is sort of separating from itself, which is no good. So let's figure out what is going on where, and what I suspect is the culprit is going to be this edge. Oops. Can sometimes be hard to select. This is not cooperating, which is always fun, right? So for whatever reason, the line select was not working, but I can do point select, and point select seemed to have cooperated because you can see that those are orange. And then I'm going to also want to select this outer rim, and you're going to say, oh, well, those are points. We don't want to bevel points, we want to bevel the lines, the edges. But you can convert from one selection to another by holding Control, which I believe I've done on a handful of occasions. And so really what we wanted was this ring right here that's lit up and this ring here that was lit up. We don't want these sort of connecting bits in the middle, so we can get rid of those by hitting B or UB, which is ring selection, whatever that means, and then just hold Control when we click that instead of Shift. Control to remove a selection. So I got rid of those, just because for whatever reason, life's just not being easy today. Oh, of course now it works. Computers, man. So with those two selected now, a little bit less painfully, we can just bevel those a little, like a real little. Okay. And we can turn back on the lens outer. And we can see there's a little bit of separation here. So this lens outer, I think what we want to do, if we solo this, so we're sort of looking at the camera from inside out now. We want to select that edge And we're going to move this along in the green direction, but we want to know how far to move it. So we're going to unsolo and just sort of turn this back on. And just sort of, I'm not sure, you know, it's not an exact science how far to pull this in, but just in some amount. And we'll see that now there's no more gap, where there was a gap when we were enabling our subdivision surface. So now that that is no longer plaguing us, that's cool. And we should be done, I think, with that and the drone body. And then
Would you do anything to the legs?
Possibly. If I wanted to be a little bit more accurate, I could try to work some sort of knife cuts or maybe extrusions or something. I probably will do some little extrusions just for the feet here. Yeah, I think this will work out. And remember, last time around when we made the legs, we lowered the amount of divisions on our circle and the leg spline, which reduced the total number of polygons we had. And so that's going to come into play right now, because we are going to make the leg spline editable by hitting C. So that just made a polygon object, but it also made these caps, which in the case of our drone, if we just solo the hierarchy, oops, not that one, this one. So these caps are whatever the heck these are, which I think we want. Not exactly sure how visible they'll be, but we don't have to delete them. So we can select these three objects here and right click and do connect objects plus delete, which turned it into one object. And then just like most times when we're working with something that's a cylinder, we want to optimize it. So we want to select all and then U-O to optimize. Now along that process, we were given these two little orange polygon tags as a gift. These were a little freebie, but we don't need them, so we can delete those. And so now we're just left with just this leg, and it is a polygon object, which we know and love, and that means that we can extrude some little feet for him. So I'm going to select polygons that roughly, oops, not that one, this one. These polygons roughly correspond to some feet. So we're going to extrude these down a little bit. And then I want them to be flat on the bottom, not sort of curved or arced like they are, because this clearly has flat feet. I can then just scale this in the Y dimension, which if I look at it from the side, again, my drawing's not the most accurate thing ever, but I can pull these down a little bit, and then we see that this will roughly correspond to the white, and then we can make the little black part, which is probably rubber. So we can make those a little bit smaller, because in the picture they're a little bit smaller. So we can do an inwards extrude inwards just a little bit, and then do a downwards extrude, and then pull these down until they line up. Cool. So this will be the little rubber feet, and this is still in a symmetry object, so we can see that it made those changes over here on the other side. So I think we're good. The only thing left to do now will be to sort of address the fact that these lines our legs don't necessarily go all the way into our body. You can sort of see there's a little bit of a gap here, which that will probably be pretty visible if I had to guess when it comes time to animate. So I'm just going to select these and these. Oops. Unsolo. And then chances are I can switch to normal. I can change my axis orientation to normal and then just raise those up a little bit. That way they aren't going to be separated from the body, which was sort of weird. I think we're good. So I will be adding a subdivision surface to this. And we see that our feet are starting to look a little weird. If I turn on and off the subdivision surface, we see that these aren't really hard-edged anymore. So we're going to add some bevels, sort of right there, and right there. And then move over to the other foot. So this is just going to be a very small bevel, if I get it to work right. There we go. So that helped straighten those out a little bit, but we see it's still sort of curving in this direction here, sort of not doing what we want it to do. So we're going to add in some loop cuts with our knife. So we're going to do one sort of right around here, and we'll see, whoops, that did a lot to straighten out that foot. So we're going to add one over on this side and then jump over to the other foot and add some there and there. So now if I look at it with outline mode, we can see that these look like nice crisp feet, which is right along what the reference photo depicts. So I think that'll do it about for the smoothing of the legs. The last thing will be to make the symmetry object editable. So we'll hit C on that, and then this will be legs, and we can pull this out from being in a group. So we're just going to make it directly a child of the subdivision surface 3, so this will be legs sub D. And then here's the legs, so we can delete that legs, the old leg symmetry group, so we don't need that anymore. So I think the last thing we'll have to smooth out will be the propeller, and then once that is taken care of, we're going to have to name and group together a whole bunch of stuff. So I think now is a good time to take a break. So I'm going to pause this. Right, I think this is going again. So the last thing we need to do is set up our propeller, which let's just close up some of these groups just so we can see a little bit better. So let's just solo this group. Oopsie daisy. Solo the hierarchy. Here we go. So due to the way that we made the little coil things, because they are still little cubes, we can just leave them as is, but when it comes time to beveling them, we don't have to make them editable just yet. We can check on the little button right here, fillet, and turn this down. We don't need it all the way up to 5. settings that are a little bit closer to this are going to be more appropriate. So we can see it just gave us some little bevels along the sides here, which are going to be enough. And then we can take what used to be our oil tank, and actually chances are this won't need to be subdivided at all. So let's check. Make our subdivision surface and hold down Alt. And not looking too shabby, if I say so. The only thing that's bugging me are the ends of the propellers, because they're turning into like paper thin, which if I look closely at my source material or my reference photos is probably not the worst thing. These are thin, but they're not paper thin. It's important to recognize. So let's just grab our propeller and then jump into the knife tool. So see here we have this orange kind of little ghost. This is reference for where the polygon is when we're not looking at the subdivision surface version. So I'm just going to add a knife cut sort of along the edge here, and you'll see that that straightened up that little problem we had. And if I look at this from the top view, I can see that the side that is the leading edge, which in this case is the side that does not have the little hump part that sticks out, so the straighter of the two parts actually has a little bit of a curve along this edge right here. I know that seems like an insignificant detail, but the more sort of those things that you catch when you're working on something that is, you know, quasi-realistic, you know, the more of those details you capture and can accurately recreate, you know, the more believable, the more authentic your model will turn out. So that's this corner right here. You can see if I look at my propeller from the top view, here's the side with the hump. So that's not the corner that I want. I want the corner from the straighter side, oopsie, which is this one. So we're going to try a bevel along this corner here and just see what happens. This may or may not completely look like crap, or it might, who knows. It's actually doing the opposite of what we want. It's actually already smooth, and this is the side that we actually want to make straighter. So we see that we've got, I know it's a little hard to tell just because of how the resolution of this photograph is, but this side is a little bit curvier than this side. So instead of making this side more curved, we can make this side less curved. That's kind of going to result in the same effect. So we can grab our knife tool on loop, and we can add in a loop cut along this side. Now, one thing I do want to bring to your attention is because if I solo single and solo this propeller, one propeller at a time, if I come in about where I would want to add in my knife cut, we can see based on this glowing line that the cut is not going all the way through my object. Currently it's only going along the top, and if I adjust my mouse, now it's only going along the bottom. Now that's sort of a weird behavior of the knife tool, and I'm not exactly sure how or why to explain that that's what it does, but that's what it does. Just something to make aware. So you have to make the cut from the open side, and if I had to suspect, it's the fact that this one side does have an opening, the other side is closed. This, I believe, is the reason why it does that. So this is where we want to insert our knife cut, and I want to uncheck that check mark. There we go. So that added that cut, which did its job over here. We can see this one side is a little bit straighter and this side's a little bit more curved, but not so fast. That might have adjusted the way that our wing looks, or propeller, sorry. It's actually not too bad. Your mileage may vary, so be careful. But mine looks pretty okay. If yours does start to look any misshapen or sort of wobbly or bumpy or too thick or too thin or whatever, you can use your slide tool, which is MO, and chances are if you slide some of these points around and just sort of kind of massage the shape of the propeller, sort of like so, you will fix whatever little error or little problem you might run into as a result of that knife cut. Mine doesn't look too bad, so I think I'm going to move on. So we're going to unsolo. So this looks good from the perspective of the two propeller blades, which is still being operated by a cloner, and then the oil tank, formerly known oil tank, which is now the propeller hub. Kind of looks like a bullet bill from Mario, kind of on its side, kind of like that. So I think this is ready to make editable. So we're going to start making these shapes editable, hitting C on them. So that's the propeller cloner, which makes two propellers. So in this case, we don't want two individual propellers over here. We want them to be conjoined. So we want to do connect objects plus delete, which just leaves us with a single object, which is good. And we can ungroup that, delete that old null. Do the same thing on the little coils. And so these are all going to be all these. Select all these, connect objects plus delete. Cool. So this will be coils. And again, we can get rid of that old null. So we're left with, what are we left with in this group? Yes. This was the motor that we split, and it's actually, just for whatever reason, I guess bad luck, it's over on a different corner of my drone. So I'm going to try to zero out the position values and see if that does what I want it to do. Cool. So you'll notice that I did not zero out the Y position because the Y position had some amount of useful data. If I do zero out the Y position, you'll see that this is now too high, so that's no good. I mean, you could just kind of lower it back down however much you think is appropriate, but that's good enough for me. So this propeller group is now ready, but the problem is that there's only one, which is kind of a drag. We need 3 more. So let's set up a new cloner. In this situation, because we're working with an object that already has position somewhere that's not the 0, 0, 0 point, right? Like our group is sort of off in wherever the heck, all the way over here in this corner is. We don't want to hold down Alt or Shift when we make our cloner. We just want to make it so it's just at the 0 point. We can see here the coordinates are 0, 0, 0. And so now I believe we can take this. So this is propeller group, and put that into the cloner, And we're going to have to set up our cloner settings again. No big deal. We don't want linear, we want radial. We don't want the XY plane, we want the XZ plane. We don't want a count of 5, we want a count of 4. And yes, this is the fun part. So they're not exactly lining up, as we see, right? Our propellers they're going out straight up, down, left, and right instead of at a 45-degree angle, which is not really that big of a deal because we can just rotate the cloner 45 degrees and then go back and re-edit this radius now. So I'm going to focus on this one right here. And it's going to be a little bit hard to tell what's going on, but you're just going to want to get this as close as you can, I think. And we can see that it's too low. No big deal, just raise it up a bit. Cool. So now we should be ready to move to the next step, which is going to be making the rest of these objects editable and naming.
Is it going to matter that when you clone them, they're all in different positions?
You mean, how do you mean?
Like the wings themselves, and like all, like if you took a picture of a drone, they're all like at like an angle to kind of make the diamond shape. Does it matter that they're all pointing in different directions?
Oh, you mean like for example, just in this photograph?
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know if that's actually like random or not. No drone expert. So it could be the fact that these do always all point in the same direction and I'm just ignorant and don't know any better. But it's not that challenging to get them to rotate correctly, or at least in the way that our photograph is depicting. So in that case, we'll want to go to the Transform tab of our cloner, and then we can rotate them that way. And it looks like 45 degrees happens to be the number that we want. And so some of you who are drone experts might realize the fact that 2 of my groups of propellers are not shaped right. And so what I mean by that is if you look at this one here in the top right and this one here in the bottom left, these propellers are matching the drawing, but the propellers in the top left and bottom right are not. And the reason for that is because these opposite groups of propellers are shaped inverted of each other. They're actually opposites. So that's going to be a little bit trickier to reproduce in this current stage, but we'll get to it in maybe 2 or 3 steps. So keep that in mind. But for the time being, they're all pointing at a perpendicular 45-degree angle, which is going to make us happy, I think. So at this point, we're going to really want to make sure that we've started naming stuff correctly. So you've got your coils, you've got your propeller, you've got your propeller hub, and then we're going to call that propeller motor. And I think one of these propeller motors down here is now no longer necessary, so we're just going to throw that down into the old folder. The reason that we want to make sure that these are named as accurately as we can, especially when it comes down to the camera group, and well, the legs and the body don't have too much in them, but definitely with like the camera and the propellers, you're not going to want to rename like 100 objects, which we're about to make 100 objects, or not 100, but we're gonna make these no longer editable by just saving real quick. Now this would be a really good idea to save and then save as a new numbered version. So I was just on version 4, I'm going to go to version 5, and the reason for that is now I'm at another one of those like checkpoint, like there's no going back stages, point of no return. When I make this cloner editable, I now have 4 propeller groups, and let's just say that I was a slacker and I didn't rename all my stuff correctly, and it was just like cube 1, cube 2, cube 3, cube 4. Well, now I've got 4 times the amount of things to rename, and that's just no good. So why rename things 4 times when you could only rename them once? Save yourself some heartache. And so here is where we're going to want to figure out which ones we want to invert to more accurately depict a propeller. So it looks like it's propeller group 0 and propeller group 2 are the culprits. So let's try to figure out which of these ones that I want to flip around. So I think it's just going to be the propeller, because I don't need to invert the motor or the hub or anything, because those aren't that crucial. So my plan is, in this case, is to flip this in this direction. And if I check my photograph, I was right. So we see that the way that I had scaled it, which I entered in -1 in my X scale on the propeller, we can see that it flipped around, which is good. And we'll do that same thing over on the propeller from propeller group 0. So here's my scale X, punch in -1, those flip around, cool. Now this way when we render out our animation, if we post it online or our portfolio or whatever, someone in the comment section is not going to say rude things like, hey bro, your propellers are backwards. So I think that'll pretty much wrap up the smoothing section, and any sort of other little further adjustments to the geometry. Oh wait, no, one last thing. So just because of the way that we had set up our propeller motors, we now have one propeller motor for each group, which isn't really like a bad thing, but it's a little unnecessary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the propeller motors from each of these groups, so we can see that I've got just the 4 of these selected, right? And these don't need to be grouped together because these aren't actually going to rotate, or at least I don't believe. You know, when the propeller spins, I'm pretty sure, now I'm no expert, so I'm willing to be debated here, but I'm pretty sure that this part does not spin. I'm pretty sure it's just the propeller that spins. So I'm going to grab the propeller motors, the 4 of them, and I can then pull them out of this group and then right click, connect objects plus delete, just to combine them down into one little unit. So this is going to be propeller motors, plural. And I'm going to do the same thing with the coils. Pull those out. I've got 4 of them, good. Connect objects plus delete, and this will be coils, plural. So I'm going to make the coils a child of the propeller motors by dragging it up that way. And then I'm going to make the propeller motors a child of the body, which is this one right here. So pull that down right there. And so this way, if I grab each of these groups, now Now, you're not going to be keyframing this, but just to demonstrate that I'm not completely lying, is that now just these are rotating, just the propeller blade and what was the oil tank little things. Now you're not going to be doing any of this animation here. I just am sort of illustrating this, so undo that if you do decide to play around with it. And the last thing we need to do today is going to be just making sure that we have everything named and grouped correctly. One thing I do want to make sure is I'm going to save, and I'm going to do something that I don't want any of you to do, but I want to do it so that way we can see if something goes wrong. So let's just say you did grab all your propeller groups and you did want to make sure that they are spinning properly, but they're doing this. And like, see, they're wobbling. They're not spinning. They're wobbling. You really don't want that to be happening for obvious reasons. So if that happens, you're going to want to check the axis point. You can sort of see this little colored axis point here is no longer, it's not in the center of this propeller, and that's because I did the thing that I told you not to do. So I'm going to undo a couple times, and we're going to see how this little axis point is moving. That's because I had just, just to demonstrate this, I had moved it, but it's possible that, it's very likely that somebody might have accidentally shifted something, or possibly, ever so slightly nudged something off to the side. If we just keep an eye on this propeller, if it's just ever so slightly off, even just, that's not off by much, but it could still possibly, cause a problem. You're going to want to make sure that your axis point looks like it's centered in each of these different groups. So if you solo just these propellers and look at them from the top, you're going to want to make sure that the axis point appears to be in the center of the oil tank, or the capsule, or the sphere, whatever you used in the center of your propellers. You're really, like, I really can't stress this enough. You really want to make sure that your axis points are set up properly and not, they're centered right here, whereas this is slightly off center now, and so if I rotate this, now it's wobbling. So you really don't want that, and it's very easy to have accidentally made that mistake. Even my drawing, I'm not lined up exactly on my drawing, but because the object is lined up, I'm just going to say, like, that's good enough. Whereas if I tried to move this possibly and line it up to my picture, it's very possible that I could have caused a problem for myself without realizing it. So we've got just these individual groups, and I think we're going to be good. I think we're done here. Pretty sure. We can leave these as subdivision surfaces for right now. So each one of, pretty much all my objects are within a subdivision surface one way or another. This is camera subd. And that's going to be where you're going to want to end up, because next class we're going to animate this real briefly, and then we're going to take it into the rendering software that we use for this assignment, which is KeyShot. Again, KeyShot is only available here on the school computers, and so you're going to need to use that software to render out your drone. We're not going to be rendering it in Cinema 4D, so try to work around that using lab time or whatever between now and the day that we come back from break. So that'll conclude today's modeling finishing lecture.